I guess inclusion to me would probably just be making sure that everyone, no matter how different or unique they are, is welcomed and can be themselves.
Inclusion is involving special education kids into the right gen ed classes.
Inclusion is when you have special ed students in the same classroom as general education students.
I honestly have no idea what inclusion is, but using context clues, I would say that it's the opposite of exclusion, which means to keep someone out. So I would think inclusion is bringing someone in.
Inclusion is when special ed and regular ed kids are put together in school.
Inclusion is when there is special education children and non-special education children mixed together in the same class.
I'm not exactly sure what inclusion is, but if I had to guess, I would say that it has to do with including special needs students and special ed students into the regular academic environment so that they can learn and be included with everybody else. So they're not separated.
I'm not sure what inclusion is.
Inclusion is the acceptance and integration of all people.
I think it's a good opportunity for special ed students because they get to be a part of regular activities and can learn from other students their age.
I think one of the things about Gen Ed students is that everyone's different and unique, but at the same time Gen Eds bring them all together. So it's a requirement for everyone to take certain Gen Ed classes, so you can meet people outside of your major with different interests, which is really a great thing.
I feel like they feel more included and feel like it's normal for them to be there and like they're in a normal class setting.
I don't really know how it would affect me to have a special ed student in my class because I never have before, but I think it would be a good opportunity for them and for regular students to learn from them.
Having a special ed student in my class wouldn't make any difference for me. It would probably honestly help general ed students as it would open their eyes towards other kinds of students in this world, and it would just be a better learning opportunity for gen ed students as well.
I think inclusion helps general education students by kind of showing them that not everyone learns the exact same way as them, and there are people with different levels of intelligence.
I feel like it's a normal thing. It doesn't really affect me either way. I have special education people in all of my classes.
From a teacher's aspect, I think inclusion would mean having to change the way you teach and having to model the classroom in a couple different ways.
It's probably difficult for a teacher having such a wide variety of students, especially if we're talking about special needs children as well. It might be difficult, so I'm sure it's hard for them.
I think inclusion can kind of be stressful on a teacher. I'm sure it's hard to have to accommodate for so many different students because even in a general education classroom, all the students are different and they learn in different ways, so I think it's good for the teachers to learn different ways of teaching the same material.
I can see how it could impact some teachers and the way they feel they have to treat them a special way, but other teachers I feel would be completely normal.
Special ed students can be included in a variety of ways, whether that be through eating in the dining halls and cafeterias, playing sports, being in classes, any social environment inside school or out of school.
I think a good way to include special education students in gen ed settings is kind of making sure they're there at all the different assemblies and speakers and in big group settings, and it also could be helpful to kind of bring them in with the gen ed students on like a smaller basis and special learning groups or reading groups or even tutoring.
I think that a general education setting that special education students would be included in would probably be like a lecture hall or just like a big class full of students.
I think inclusion is a great idea because it gives those students a chance to operate in a classroom in a way that every other student gets the opportunity to.
I think it's a great idea just because it allows multiple people to be with one another and kind of attain to all of their different assets.
I think it's a good idea because it makes them feel like they're just a part of the university as every other student.
Okay, so for me, with inclusion, because I'm a special education major, I kind of had an idea of what it was, but I wasn't exactly sure like what all it entailed and what all went into it with the students and the teachers.
And then for me, my mom is actually a kindergarten teacher, and she has kids who are mainstreamed in, and she has like inclusion students in her classroom. So from like personal experience and like being around them so much in her classroom, I kind of had like a better sense of what it was before I came into this class.
And then from a lot of our responses, I think everyone generally thought that inclusion was a good idea because on paper it does sound like a good idea, but they don't necessarily know what all goes into it with teachers and students. So from that aspect, like when we talked about in class that teachers don't necessarily have all the opportunities, it might not be the best option.
And then a lot of people that we asked, they said they could give us a definition of inclusion, but they couldn't really tell us like how it was implemented or like how it affected certain students. So they could kind of write it down on paper, but they couldn't really tell us how it was implemented in schools and like the real world.
So going off of what Ashley said, it may be the case that it's not that noticeable. And all of the people we interviewed were not special ed students. So even though all of our responses had like a good demographic, they were pretty one way in that aspect. So it would be interesting to know like how a special ed student would feel as far as their opinion on inclusion and if they think it's a good idea or if they notice it at all.